parents, teachers, guardians, and mentors. We can all agree you've got big shoes to fill, and it may feel like they're always getting bigger and more daunting. Welcome to Parenting Adventures, where we aim to be a beacon of support and knowledge for those navigating the complexities of parenting. Each episode, we bring on experts to walk us through the most pressing issues facing families, with evidence-based, practical strategies. And if school struggles are part of the puzzle, check out how Tutor Teach can help. Now, let's dive into the episode.
What if imagination was the key to unlocking deeper, more meaningful learning for children and for us? I'm your host, Lara, and today we're joined by Dr. Gillian Judson, an educator, researcher, and expert in bringing imagination to the forefront of education. As a faculty member at Simon Fraser University and the creator of imaginative, Dr. Judson has revolutionized how we think about learning, showing how imagination connects emotions, places, and ideas to make education truly impactful. Her work empowers parents and teachers to cultivate imagination in learners of all ages. In this episode, we explore why imagination is so essential, how it transforms education, and why it's more important than ever in our fast-paced, tech-driven world. Whether you're a parent or an educator, this conversation will inspire you to reimagine what learning can look like. You won't want to miss it. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. To start, can you share a bit about yourself and what sparked your passion for imagination and its role in education?
Sure. So my name is Dr. Gillian Judson. I'm currently an assistant professor at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, Canada. But I am a teacher at heart, and I began my interest in imagination, I guess, long before I began teaching, because I was raised in a family that, we were encouraged to notice the wonder in the world around us, and specifically in the natural world. I also then, as I said, was a high school teacher for 7 years, and I noticed that the moments that were the most impactful for my students and the most enjoyable for myself were when my students were leaning in, emotionally and imaginatively engaged. So that's where it started. And then my interest as a teacher, and then I went back and did graduate work, ended up investigating the role of imagination in learning, specifically in outdoor learning, and now in leadership ever since. So that's the topic of my research.
That's fantastic. And I imagine imagination has no bounds with age. There's no age constriction on imagination. Is that true?
Well, one of the biggest problems I face is misunderstanding of what it is. Unfortunately, in our world, we've taken just a sliver of what imagination is. And by that, I mean the fantasy life of a child, or fantasy, anything detached from reality, anything that is way out there, never going to happen, or the realm of the arts. We've associated that aspect of imagination with all that it is. And that is a huge problem, because if you consider it to be only children, childlike fantasy, untethered from reality, why would a CEO consider it important in their organization? Why would a mathematician, a teacher of mathematics, consider it important to cultivate it? So absolutely. Imagination is a capacity that all human beings have, and it is incredibly valuable and important as adults. I know there's a belief, too, that children are more imaginative than adults, and I would disagree with that.
Imagination is something we often associate with children, like you just said, but you focus on it as a key to meaningful learning. How would you define imagination, and why do you think it's so essential, not just for education, but for life in general?
I think I need to answer this in a couple of parts. First is just sort of clarify what I mean by imagination, because I think that any of your North American listeners hear the word imagination and they picture SpongeBob SquarePants. Imagination, that video that is haunting me every day of my life, because it trivializes imagination. So what I'm talking about is the ability to envision the possible in all things. And it's only out of that first imagining or envisioning what is not that we create and that we innovate. So any creative, innovative change capacity comes first out of the ability to envision something different. So we can immediately now see, well, that's incredibly valuable in organizations or in medical innovation or anything. So now to the question of education, it's fascinating to me, and I've done a lot of research. My master's and PhD are curriculum-based degrees. So how we often do not talk about the role of emotion in learning. The conversations around emotion tend to go to the dimensions of social emotional learning and the incredible importance of students' emotional well-being, mental health, ability to self-regulate, ability to handle anxiety and all those things. So important. But when we also talk about a very important part of school, which is learning things, the things we most remember and understand have an emotional dimension. Imagination is always emotional. When we imagine anything, our emotions are ignited. So if you want students to remember anything, whether they're 6 or 66, they need to have their emotions ignited. And that's what imagination does. When you use imagination to learn something, then you tie up that knowledge with emotion and you pass it through the amygdala of the brain and it becomes memorable. So I should probably now go to the image I wanted to cultivate for you, because if you Google images of imagination, you get glitter and unicorns and SpongeBob and fairies and swirling colors, and it doesn't represent what imagination does in our lives. So I encourage people, and I write about this, to think about imagination as the soil. Actually, you cultivate it with particular tools. And once you've cultivated imagination, many more things can grow out of it, those creative acts, those innovations. So what are the tools to cultivate it? Stories, images, mental images, games, drama, what if it, perspective taking. There's so many different tools that we use in our practice as those of us who use imaginative pedagogies that actually cultivate imagination. So that's the learning piece. It's important, and there's practical ways we can cultivate it in classrooms so that the knowledge the kids are learning affects them and becomes memorable and meaningful.
So it helps with retention.
Yeah, I mean, imagination is if we look evolutionarily, it is one of the most powerful ways we remember things. If you think of oral cultures, the stories within oral cultures are vividly imaginative. They have extreme and bizarre features to them because those images that those words evoke in the human mind make those stories memorable. So one of the most powerful ways human beings remember anything is through story. And the aspects of story that make things memorable are different tools of imagination. And I'm really referring here to the prolific work of the now late Dr. Kieran Egan from Simon Fraser University and his theories of the tools of imagination and an approach to teaching called imaginative education. But that is one of the most powerful things, absolutely, is the ability to retain and remember. It increases our ability to remember when we use some aspect of imagination.
That's so important, because at Tutor Teach, that's one of the biggest problems is parents are saying, my child understands things in the moment, but they can't retain it and then apply it. And so to incorporate imagination into their learnings would help with the retention side of things. Do you think there's a misconception that imagination goes hand in hand with having an inherently creative mind? Because I know for me, I wouldn't label myself or consider myself super creative, artsy, anything like that. So would that impact my ability to embrace my imagination, I guess?
But I'm with you. I'm not an artiste, and I'm not a dancer, and I don't do a lot of making things with my hands. But I love language and I love words and I love storytelling. So I think it is a misconception and a problem, because then some folks think this isn't for me. However, if we're going back to Tutor Teach, if you look at mnemonics and tricks for remembering things, those are features of imagination. You know how they say you can remember 100 people's names, but you picture a house in your head and someone's name is on the fruit bowl and somebody's name is halfway up the stairs. Well, what you're using in that case is two things. One would be a vivid image, which is incredibly easy to remember. We remember images. Images move us and they affect us. That's why oral storytelling is so powerful. Because, and that's also why over-reliance on media and all these images being provided to us now rather than us invoking them in our heads is an issue. But so yes, there are tools of imagination that you can use. Another example is metaphor. What a powerful way to remember a concept is when you use a metaphor or an analogy, because you're leaning in and making comparisons across subjects and topics, which evokes emotion, which helps us remember and understand. So absolutely yes to helping with memory. and also remembering things, also conceptualizing and understanding to begin with. And absolutely, this is a capacity that we all have, and we have to undo these heavy jacket of pressure that says I am or am not imaginative. If you weren't imaginative, you wouldn't resolve all the day-to-day problems that we face. The ability to flex in the moment. It's Stephen Asma, a researcher of imagination, who says we live in a world of possibilities and spontaneous shifts. We're always improvising. That is the work of imagination.
How is AI going to affect, or has already started affecting, the cultivation of imagination?
It's a fascinating question. I mean, I don't know. I think that we don't even have the ability to really comprehend yet all that could and will change. But I do know that I feel like imagination has been sort of the unsung hero that's always been helping human beings, I think, ideate. Obviously, the creators of AI have used imagination to generate those possibilities, right? And so at this point, does an invention, a computer, an automation have an imagination, or is it just programmed in a way to create possibilities at maybe infinitely quicker rate than the human mind or my mind can operate? So the answer is, this is fascinating. I don't think it reduces our capacity to imagine, but if we rely on AI rather than doing the work of cultivating our own imaginations, isn't that what we worry about with our kids, is that they're relying on AI rather than generating their own creative topic sentence for a paragraph? Yeah, I think it will affect us, because if you don't use it, if you don't cultivate it, some people talk about imagination as a muscle. I like that analogy, but I prefer the soil one better for reasons too many to talk about. But if we don't cultivate it, you're not going to increase the generativity of that soil. So it's a risk for those who rely on other things rather than their own imagination.
We'll come back in 10 years and see what the studies say.
Sure.
We'll see how it's affected imagination. So have you noticed any cultural shifts in how we view imagination, either in education or in society as a whole? Do you think it's being undervalued in today's fast-paced, technology-driven world?
It's always been undervalued because it's been associated with children, and we don't value children. We underestimate children all the time. But I think that, unfortunately, because it has been sort of pigeonholed into certain ways of being, and there's misconceptions that it's the capacity of a certain few people, not everyone, that it's frivolous, that it's a waste of time. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in actionable acts of imagination. And there's many people that write about the pragmatic imagination and its application. So Pendleton, Julian, and Brown specifically write about pragmatic imagination. So is there a shift? I think people are open to the conversations I'm having and others are having, many others in the field are having, and sort of saying, we need to address these misconceptions, because there is really no way, as Julian, Pendleton, and Brown talk about, you're going to live in a whitewater, rapidly changing world unless you fully embrace and work to cultivate your imagination. So that previous scholar I spoke of, Dr. Kieran Egan, his view of education was it wasn't that particular knowledge was most important that our graduates would have, or specific knowledge in particular, but that they had the most powerful use of their own imagination. They were actively able to use metaphor. They could create and tell vivid stories. They could evoke and identify mysteries and a sense of wonder. And those were the people that would be most qualified and capable. So when you describe education in that way, people listen, because it's about being flexibly able to pivot in the world. I think that is interesting. But to your first question, are we all eager and looking for the conversation? Sadly, no, because it is a word that's misunderstood. That's my one hope for anyone who listens to this particular podcast, is rethink it. Put SpongeBob to the side and think about soil and think of all the ways that anything that's created has to first come from that ability to what if.
I've already rethought my own imagination, and I'm starting to think that I have a good one. That I have one, because you're right. It's really, really associated to children. And when I mentioned to you earlier, I have 4 kids. Every time we had a child, I felt like I was redeveloping that piece of myself because I was looking at the world through their eyes again. But what happens when they grow up? And now I'm not able to look through their eyes anymore. And so it's interesting to really think that we all have it, and it's not an age-defining piece of who we are.
Just to be blasphemous, people say children are more imaginative than adults. That's typically what people say, right? And also people always talk about imagination as limitless. And I'd like to plant a couple seeds. One is that actually what feeds imagination is knowledge. So the people that have the most knowledge and the most experience of anything have a better, stronger ability to envision combinations of different things. So it's actually adults. It's the people that have the most knowledge of science, chemistry, that can most imaginatively take steps further. So let's imagine that for kids. How can we provide them with the richest learning experiences possible so that they end up having a much stronger imagination? And let's not pave it over in schools by limiting how we allow them to show what they know, the ways in which that we engage, for sure. And I agree with you that your own knowledge and ability to imagine possibilities for your own children expand as you have your fourth. And maybe, I don't know, maybe you're going to have 5, 6, 7.
No.
But no, but it's knowledge that grows. So the possibilities actually expand the more you know and experience the world, which is huge. Imagination is also culturally shaped, right? So just to mention, people have said to me, I do a lot of work in environmental topics. They say the ecological crises are a failure of imagination. And I say, no, they're not. They're the product of a very particular industrial and extractive way of seeing the natural world, right? So we have to remember that our beliefs, our values, the context we're in shape our imaginations.
I appreciate that clarification. And I think that it's interesting and something to sit on, because that's reshaping the way that adults think, I think.
I agree. And I'm sorry I'm getting super passionate, but I'm a big imaginator.
I want you to be super passionate because that explains it. It's like a clarification point. And if you're passionate about it, so am I. I'm like thinking about this and thinking about the people I surround myself with, and have I seen pieces of this in them? And, I think about my dad because, like you, he's got a PhD in his is in biology, and he's so imaginative, and it all makes sense, but I never would have used that word. I never would have not labeled it, but defined it that way, I suppose. And so very interesting. So how can teachers consciously and actively foster imagination in their classrooms and engage their students on a deeper level? Can you explain what this looks like in practice?
Absolutely, because I teach in a faculty of education. So I teach about an approach to teaching called imaginative education. And if anybody wants to look it up, you can start by looking at a blog I run for teachers, educationthatinspires.ca. The name of the blog is Imagine Ed. But in a nutshell, there's tools that we use to make sense of our worlds, tools that we use that come along with oral language, storytelling, images, metaphors, tools that come along with reading and literacy, and tools that come along with theoretical thinking. And we might consider those different ways the imagination grasps the world. And so educators use those tools to shape the lessons that they're teaching. Using particular tools, what Kieran Egan called cognitive tools. You use metaphors and images, you make the knowledge more powerful. You also tie up imagination for students learning. So we run master's programs on imaginative pedagogy, imaginative education. So it's hard to give a synopsis, but if you look up imaginative education, Kieran Egan, EGAN, or throw in my name or go to that blog, you'll see very specific examples. There's a series in there called Tips for Imaginative Educators, which outlines 15 specific tools you can use in any subject area to make the way you afford students the opportunity to learn more emotionally open, because it's getting their emotions involved that's most powerful. The biggest difference is that unlike many objectives-based ways of teaching, which is very common, it's how I was educated to be a teacher. You start with your end product and you logically break it up into 3 pieces and you test to see whether your objectives were fulfilled. But we're not refrigerators. And I say that because the model of objectives-based teaching is based on a process of building refrigerators. I'm not kidding you. That's a whole other topic. We start in imaginative education by saying, what's the story on the topic? Like, what's the story on on neutrons and protons in chemistry? What's the story on a certain form of literature? What's the story on this political activity? Because when you seek the story in a topic, you're evoking imagination. So many, many practical ways to do it. If you're interested, look up imaginative education, not just K-12, all the way through post-secondary.
It's taking the curriculum and going into it in a more deeper level almost, and finding ways to incorporate that as a part of the teaching. Is that kind of...
It could be considered going deeper. You do need, but it's almost entering your planning with affective alertness. You're looking for the story. You're looking for what is it about osmosis that my students are going to want to learn more about? What's cool about it? What's odd about it? What are the bizarre features of it? We want to make ordinary things look extraordinary. And that's how we get people to listen. I'm a big fan of Bill Bryson's work. He wrote a book called The Short History of Nearly Everything. And he's so good at it. Like, he writes about an atom and describes the size of it. Like, you just want to tell somebody next to you on a bus how small an atom is. Like, that's engaging. So how do we as teachers evoke that same interest and level of engagement with our students? And that's what imaginative education, that practice, it's known around the world. There's been a lot of empirical research on it. But interestingly, imagination is not a hot topic in education. Blows my mind how it can't be, but it tends to be associated with primary school, open and emergent teaching, but it isn't associated with the scholarly and rigorous work of, say, a grade 11 math class, but it should be. And that's what imaginative education offers teachers.
This just makes so much sense, because whenever you hear a really tantalizing story or something that, like you said, evokes emotion, that's what you remember. And that's what these high schoolers who are struggling with their academia, or, you know, the junior high kids who are a little bit checked out maybe because it's a big leap from elementary school. This is what they need to retain the information. It's easy to keep repeating the same thing over and over again. This is the function. This is the equation. This is this is what reproduction looks like. All of that is, step by step, but is it actually inspiring them? But if it were to inspire them, perhaps that would help them choose what they want to do with their lives and give them the answers that they don't even know they're looking for.
I totally agree. Interestingly, one of the dangers of teaching is planning your teaching for thinkers, as if the classroom is full of thinkers. There was a psychologist in the US named David Kresh who said, human beings never just think. They perceive and they feel and they think. And he said, the people in the classroom are thinkers. If you leave emotion out of it, educators are some of the most hardworking, brilliant, and wonderful people I've ever met. I'm the biggest teacher supporter in the world. I am also a teacher myself, but we can misplace our time and energy. If you leave emotional engagement out, the students are not going to remember, be interested enough or inspired enough to continue to learn about it. So yeah, that's the whole point, is bringing emotion and imagination to the foreground, not as a break from learning, but as the way to actually academically, rigorously learn things.
You know what's interesting? I was working on some Biology 30 curriculum for Tutor Teach, and it talks about reproduction, and it talks about the different cycles, and then it talks about the birth of a child and the trimesters. And I finally understood it as someone who went through it. And it was the first time, of course, I wouldn't have understood that in high school because I hadn't had a baby. But I understood it because it evoked emotion out of me, where I was like, this is really neat. And so I can see how that would be so important, but it's also human connection side, because we all want to have that teacher we never forget. And, those are the ones who connect on a more emotional storytelling way. That's the ones who inspire those students to really think for themselves and to really develop their own futures. And so I just love this on every single level. Love it. Love your work.
Thank you. I do too. But yeah, you're exactly. Those are the teachers that they move. Those teachers affect us. They move us. And the only thing that changes and the only things we remember, they move us.
Absolutely. For those listening who would like to learn more about what you do and find more of your work, I know you mentioned your blog, Education That Inspires. Is there anywhere else that they can go and find more information?
Yeah, sure. So I've been writing things down, lots of scribbling, and there's books available on Amazon and other places. You can look me up at Simon Fraser University. But one of the projects I've been involved in lately, which is super fun, is looking at the role of imagination in leadership. And we got some funding to do a big podcast and blog series on how leaders around the world, we have some from Europe and across North America, how they employ tools of imagination to support social and ecological justice in their work. So if you want to check that out, that's at cultivateimagination.ca. And you can find the actual podcast episodes on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And that's a good place to start. And I'm always open to hearing from folks. And I hope that today's conversation just, move people to want to learn more.
Absolutely. Do you have any social media?
I do. So on X, I'm at perfinker. Now you know what perfinker means. Perfinker. Also on Blue Sky at perfinker, and I'm on LinkedIn.
Perfect. I have absolutely loved this conversation. I feel like I'm walking away with way more information than when you and I first said hello today. And I know that our listeners will too. And this is definitely something that I think teachers in particular, or any type of mentor, any adult really needs to listen to find their inner imagination and to see that it's not there's no end game to it. And just absolutely love this conversation. So thanks for sharing with us.
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
That's it for this episode of Parenting Adventures. Thanks for listening. We hope it gives you that extra bit of confidence that you need to conquer the road ahead. And if you're looking for academic support to ensure your kids thrive in school, visit tutorteach.ca to learn how we're here for families just like yours. We'll see you in the next episode.